Okay, so welcome, and if others join a bit later, that's also okay. Just forgive the voice. I'm just getting over a bit of a cold, but otherwise good. Thank God. So I'll start with just a summary, just a summary of this week's Parsha, and then we'll go into a couple of more in-depth ideas about the Parsha. So firstly, to know that the Parsha of Toldot is the only Parsha that's devoted entirely to the life of Yitzchak. Um, In many ways, Yitzchak is the least described of the three Avot, yet in this week's Parsha of Toldot, um, it reveals the depth, the complexity, and the quiet strength, otherwise known as the Gvura of Yitzchak. The opening line of the Parsha begins, "These are the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. Avram begot Yitzchak." And again, there's a double language there. There seems to be a redundancy. The Torah emphasizes twice that Yitzchak is truly Abraham's son, to which Rashi famously explains that the cynics in the community claim that Avimelech, not Abraham, fathered Yitzchak. So therefore Hashem made Yitzchak's features identical to Abraham's to silence them. So that's why it's repeated. On a deeper level, teaches us that Yitzchak is the spiritual continuation of Abraham, not a carbon copy, but a successor who develops the next stage of the covenant. If you move slightly on in the Parsha, we know that Yitzhak marries Rivka at the age of 40. For 20 years, they're unable to have children. The Torah says about Yitzhak that he prayed intensely. We know that Rivka prayed as well. The Midrash says that their prayers were in unison. They prayed opposite each other. Um, Interesting enough, we're told that Yitzchak's prayers was answered first, which teaches us a halachic principle that the prayer of a tzaddik, who himself is the son of a tzaddik, is answered before just a plain tzaddik. In the case of Rivka, yes, she was righteous, but she didn't come from a righteous parentage. Um, Eventually, Rivka does fall pregnant, and we're told that it actually becomes unbearable. The pregnancy becomes unbearable. She feels this internal turmoil inside of herself. Rashi brings the famous midrash, excuse me, that says that when she would walk past a place of Torah learning, then one would kick, obviously that being Yaakov. When they'd go past a place of idol worship, then Esav pushed. And Rivka turns to Hashem and she receives the prophecy, being that there are two nations in your womb, and that the older one will serve the younger one. And this obviously sets the stage for this entire drama between the brothers. We know that Esav is the first one to emerge. We're told that he's red, he's hairy, um, signs that the Midrash reads as temperamentally inclined to bloodshed, the idea of red. Yaakov, as we know, emerges holding Esav's heel. Um, and their names obviously are indicative of all of this. Esau from the word asui, which means made, complete. He was already hairy. I mean, he already looked not like a baby. Yaakov from the word a cave heel, because he was holding onto the heel of his brother. Now, straight away, the Torah tells us that they took different paths. Esau, we're told, became a man of the field, Ish Sadeh, and Yaakov, we were told, is your Ish Tam, a wholesome man, Yoshev Ohalim, dwelling in tents. When we speak about man of the field regarding Esav, it's not only hunting, but also refers, our rabbis tell us, to a lack of internal discipline. When we speak about Yaakov being a wholesome person, it means pure, straightforward, morally consistent. Now we obviously know through the parasha that Rivka gravitates towards Yaakov's inner purity. Yitzhak gravitates to Esav's outward strength. And the Torah, in fact, tells us that Yitzhak loved Esav, kitzayid befiv, literally means because game was in his mouth. But that can also be read that Yitzhak tasted Esav's potential greatness. And I'm going to touch on that a bit more in a few moments' time. In the Parsha, we also have the famous idea of Esav returning home. One particular day, he's tired from the hunt. Yaakov has cooked lentils. This is, we're told, because it was in the morning period for Abraham had passed away. Esav demands food. Yaakov, in return, asks for the Bechorah, the firstborn rights. Esav dismisses it. Um, he's not interested in the firstborn rights. He said, "Behold, I'm going to die. What is this Bechorah? What is this birthright to me anyway?" And Rashi notes that he's in fact mocking the Bechorah. He's rejecting the responsibilities, and I'll also touch on that a little bit later as well. Um, and again, this whole idea of selling the birthright obviously shows that Esav is not fit to take on any spiritual duty, any spiritual responsibility. We also have in this week's parsha that a famine drives Yitzchak to a place called Gerar. He's told not to leave the land. Unlike, if you recall, Avram in fact went to Egypt when there was famine. Yitzchak remains in the land of Israel. He redigs Avram's wells, which the Philistines had blocked. The wells become symbols of his perseverance, and they become signs of his quiet authority and his determination to restore his father's legacy. We told the names of the three wells, Asek, Sitna, and Rehovot, which represent conflict, hatred, and space, like spacious prosperity. And what this symbolizes is the sequence of Yitzchak's approach to life, restraint, endurance, and eventually coming to divine expansion. That's the concept of the wells. Of course, you're familiar with the whole idea of Yitzhak now sensing that his end was nigh. He calls Esav to prepare food so that he can bless him afterwards. Just an idea regarding that. What's the idea of food? So a person has to be in a state of happiness to be able to give blessing. Rivka overhears this. She understands prophetically that Yaakov must receive the blessing. She instructs Yaakov to disguise himself. Yaakov is a bit hesitant, but we know that ultimately he obeys his mother. We know that Yitzchak is blind, and he says that the voice sounds like Yaakov, but the hands feel like Esav, because Yaakov is dressed in Esav's clothing. And we know that Yitzhak gives the blessing meant for Esav to Yaakov. When Esav returns, he's horrified. He begs his father, and Yitzhak trembles, realizing that the divine plan has revealed itself. And what he in fact utters, he says, Gam Baruch Yiyeh, he shall indeed remain blessed. Again, I'll touch on that now shortly as well. Just to finish off the summary of the parsha, Esav vows revenge. Yaakov is sent to Rivka's family to find a wife and to escape. Esav, before leaving, Yitzhak blesses Yaakov. What is he blessed with? He's blessed with the covenant, the Brit of Abraham. And that's really the parsha in a nutshell. But I guess to understand Toldot, to understand this parsha, we need to understand why. Why did Yitzhak believe that Esav should receive the primary blessing? What we also have to try and understand what Yaakov and Esav represent philosophically, spiritually, psychologically. And we need to try and understand how the eventual fusion of their roles forms the foundation of Jewish destiny. So I want to try and go through those ideas in the next 20 minutes or so. Okay, so the first question, how could Yitzhak is the second of the Avot. He's a tzaddik. He's a righteous individual. How could he want to give the blessing to Esav? Esav is no good doer. He's an evil man. And the classic commentators offer explanations. And they're possibly, we can say that they're misinterpreted by more modern readers. We maybe assume that Yitzhak was fooled, his love blinded him. But our rabbis and the Rishonim, the early deep thinkers, they actually tell us that Yitzhak wasn't deceived. He was actually operating from a different or with a different model of leadership. So let's unpack this a bit more. If we look at what Yitzhak's nature was, his soul was rooted in the character, in the soul trait, if you like, of Gevurah. And Gevurah is discipline, boundaries, strength, consistency. Just comparing that with Abraham, Abraham was what is symbolized chesed, outreach, warmth. Um, Yitzhak is more inward, more about stability. In honesty, Yitzhak is the first Jew born holy, right? He's born after Abraham has his bris. He's the only one that never leaves Eretz Israel. He's the only one who is not allowed to leave Israel. He remains there his whole life, and he almost becomes a sacrifice. Um, so his life is defined by fear of heaven, by this inner fire, and by restraint. Why does this matter? Because Yitzhak understood that the world must be built, obviously with Torah, but it needs more than Torah. It needs strength. And to Yitzhak, Esav embodied the strength. The Yaakov embodied Torah. That's obvious. That's a given. But Esav embodied strength, and Yitzhak believed that the two forces have to combine to produce complete and the perfect nature. And that's key to understanding how Yitzhak, his whole leaning towards Esau comes about. Um, Yitzhak isn't described in the Torah as interacting with the outside world in the same way that Abraham does or did. And I said that Abraham was about outreach, warmth, going out. Abraham travels, he fights battles, he influences kings, he even argues with Hashem. And again, later on, Yaakov, again, he travels, he negotiates, he has fights with Lavan. But Yitzhak stays home. Yitzhak, as I said, is that perfect burnt offering. He lives with a consciousness of holiness and potential, and his strength is the one of inwardness, not to change the world, but to see and to perceive the world's inner possibility. Okay, so this could maybe explain why Yitzhak saw Esav differently from the way that Rivka did. Now think about Rivka. Rivka grew up in a home filled with deceit, corruption, trickery, idolatry. So you could say that she was sensitive, she was primed, she had a keen radar to pick up danger. So she definitely had the emotional intelligence, and she had the practical, for lack of a better word, a practical intelligence, whereas Yitzhak had the spiritual intelligence. Yitzhak um, looked at the strength, not the outcomes. So Yitzhak saw raw material. He didn't necessarily look at to see what the final product would be. And what Esav, the characteristics that Esav possessed, that Yitzhak believed, excuse me, sorry, that Yitzhak believed would be essential to the Jewish mission. And I'll just go through a couple of them with you. So Asaph possessed courage, leadership, physical strength, charisma, ability to confront evil in this world, drive, passion, fire. And as I said before, Yitzhak believed that spirituality alone can't shape the nation. Um, yes, Abraham's chesed brought people close, but someone also has to defend the family. Someone has to fight the battles. Someone has to build the physical infrastructure, engage with that harsh, with that real world out there. So in Yitzhak's eyes, Esav wasn't the antithesis of holiness. He was in fact the means. He was the vessel that could protect the holiness. And that's important to understand Yitzhak's leaning, Yitzhak's preference, if you like, towards Esav. Um, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who by now you know I quote quite often, one of the more contemporary commentators, so he famously writes that Yitzchak envisaged a future in which Yaakov and Esav would in fact be partners. Yaakov would be the one with the spiritual wisdom, with Torah, with the inner development, and Esav would be the one with the worldly might, with the national strength, with engaging with the external world. And what Yitzhak saw that was that together they would create the people who could bring Hashem into every aspect of life. And that really is the purpose of creation, the purpose of Torah. So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch explains that Yitzchak loved Esav, now listen to this, not despite his toughness, but actually because of it. So he's not loving him in spite of the fact that he's a ruffian. He loves Yitzchak precisely because he has that characteristic, because he needed that. Esav had the qualities, if you want to look at it again, Yaakov has maybe the qualities of a teacher, whereas Esav has the qualities of a ruler. And you need to have both in a successful nation. And what he saw was Esav's aggression, if it could be tamed, if it could be properly directed, if it could be sanctified, would be and could be this powerful vehicle for the covenant of Abraham to be taken further. Esav's drive, his passion, his fearlessness, that could all be used, and that could be used to protect Yaakov, and that would be the ultimate partnership. Um, And again, if you think about the blessings of physical abundance, of dew of heaven, I'm just going through the words of the bracha, and domination of of nations, that was absolutely suited to a man of action. Yitzchak never intended to give Esav the spiritual covenant. So I think it's important to realize. Yitzchak always intended that the spiritual covenant should go to Yaakov. Um, because again, that was reserved for the child who embodied spiritual purity. That was a Yaakov, Ishtam, the wholesome person. Um, and that's why later we're going to see at the end of the Parsha, when he sends off Yaakov's now fleeing from Esau, he's going to find a wife. He actually gives him what's called Birchat Avraham. He gives him the blessing of Abraham. It's expressly written like that. So Yaakov's plan was Yaakov equals Torah and spiritual leadership. Esav would equal nation building, protection, and worldly leadership. Okay, just about the idea um, about the concept of blindness. We can't move away from it because the verse specifically says before this whole episode of the blessings and Yaakov dressing himself as Esav, it's emphasized that Yitzchak is blind. And many interpret this as a reason why he didn't realize Esav's character. But in fact, many of the commentators disagree vehemently. So the Sforno and the Barbanel, just to mention two, they say that Yitzhak blindness was a divine intervention. It wasn't his personal failure. The blindness allowed Yitzhak's inner vision to operate uninfluenced by external impressions. So he didn't judge Yaakov and Esav by their daily behavior, but what he was looking at, or he was judging, was the spiritual potential of their souls. And his blindness, according to these commentators and others, symbolized that he saw deeper than what the eye could perceive. Yes, there may have been physical blindness, but that physical blindness allowed vision of a much deeper meaning. The Zohar actually says that Yitzhak's blindness was the darkness before the revelation of the light. What does it mean? So it means that Hashem hid the true nature of Asa from him so that the blessings would unfold exactly as the divine plan required. And in fact, that's exactly how it does happen. So we should never think that Yitzhak's blindness was a flaw. It in fact was a tool. If we just dissect now a little bit of Rivka's prophecy versus Yitzchak's philosophy, if I can put it like that, Rivka understood something that Yitzchak did not understand. And it's not because she was more insightful, it's because she had the prophecy that Yitzchak didn't receive. It's as simple as that. Remember, in the summary, I said that she had this inner turmoil in her womb. She went to find out, to ask Hashem about it. And the words that she got back were, the older would serve the younger. So Rivka already knows the divine plan. Yitzhak only knows the human plan. Rivka also has a psychological insight that Yitzhak lacks. And what's that again? Because she grew up in the house of Lavan. She understood manipulation, deceit, cunning. She recognized Esau's behavior not as immaturity, but as a real moral instability, which was absolutely dangerous. Rivka was able to hear, and she did hear, Esau screaming, Esau swearing, Esau marrying the Hittite woman, Esau comforting himself with thoughts of murder and murdering and idolatrous behavior. So she really knows the nature of Esau. Yitzchak sees, what does Yitzchak see? Yitzhak sees Esau honoring his father. He sees Esau hunting for his father to please him. Esau bringing him food. Esau showing strength and leadership. So again, Yitzhak sees the strength and the potential, whereas Rivka sees the end product. Again, that's very important. Yitzhak sees the innate potential, the power, the possibility, but Rivka sees exactly what's already in front of her. The koach, the strength versus the mitziut, what's actually there, what's actually before me, what is actually actualized before me. Um, okay, I'm just looking at my notes here, but just I haven't left out anything. Um, Also very important to note that after Yaakov receives the blessing, and then we know Esau arrives on the scene, and then Yitzhak realizes that something monumental has occurred. And it says, the Torah says that Yitzhak trembled a great trembling exceedingly. That's the English. Now, again, that doesn't mean, often we read that and we think that Yitzhak trembles because he's made a terrible mistake in giving Esau the bracha. No, that's an incorrect reading. Rashi says that he suddenly saw Gehenna. Gehenna loosely translated is hell, but it's a very, very bad translation. Um, he saw Gehenna open beneath Esau. And the Midrash says that Hashem revealed Esau's true nature to him at that very moment. So Yitzhak, at that moment, where he says, Vayecherad charada gedolah, where he trembles, a terrible trembling, Yitzhak now sees what Rivka saw all along. And his reaction reaffirms the correctness of what had just occurred. And that's why he says, Gam Baruch Yihiyeh, the blessing shall remain with him. Because think about it. If Yitzhak was trembling because he'd made a mistake, so can he not retract the bracha? Right? Take it away. Make it a curse, or just say, I no longer give you the blessing. No. He doesn't do that. He doesn't nullify it. He accepts a divine revelation, and he absolutely now acknowledges what Rivka was aware of all this time, that Yaakov is the true heir. And this, in fact, this moment where he trembles, it marks the transition from Yitzchak's plan, so to speak, to Hashem's plan. Um, okay, I said already that the whole concept of the two sons of Yitzhak representing two different paths. I'll just spell it out again. So Esav, what Esav represents is power, is action, is confrontation with evil, is engagement with the physical. Okay, and obviously all of that Yitzhak saw as necessary to protect and to get Torah to grow in the outside world. Yaakov represents introspection, contemplation, Torah, spiritual integrity, moral clarity, inner development. Um, and obviously Hashem wants a world in which holiness enters the physical realm. And that can't happen with spirituality alone. It needs strength, it needs sanctified strength. And that's what Yitzhak was hoping for in Esav. But obviously, when Esav failed his part, he didn't come to the party, so to speak. He didn't grab hold of that partnership. Then Esav's failure forces Yaakov to assume both of those missions. Um, we can actually ask the question, what do you think, what would have been, what would the world have looked like if Yaakov and Esav had fulfilled their intended roles? And in fact, some of the commentators do give their perception, do give an answer to this. and Ramban, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch again, the Netziv, Rav Kook, just to mention a few, all describe a single vision. And they say that Yaakov and Esav were meant to build one nation together, not as rivals, but partners. The partnership would have two essential forces: the inner world of Yaakov, Torah, values, morality, truth, purpose, and the Esav, the external world. Let's call it politics, economics, defense. Just think about it in a country today. Everything the country needs to have in place: infrastructure, construction, leadership, engagement with society. And that was a plan I should have been. But Esav again wasn't ready to accept it, and therefore it went to Yaakov to have to do both. And in fact, that's what we see right at the beginning with Yaakov buying or swapping a bowl of lentil soup for the birthright, because that also is a misunderstood event in the Torah. But again, Vayivez Esav et habochara, it says quite clearly that Esav despised the birthright. Why? Why? Why would anyone despise the blessings of the firstborn? Doesn't make sense. But if we unpack the whole concept, what did the Bechorah originally mean? It meant service in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. It meant bringing the sacrifices. It meant representing the family before Hashem. Remember that before the Leviim replaced them, the firstborns were going to be the Kohanim. They were going to be the ones responsible for the temple service. All the things I've just mentioned: service in the Mishkan, the bringing of sacrifices, representing the family before Hashem. It was only, I don't want to get too sidetracked, it was only after the sin of the golden calf, where the tribe of Levi didn't sin, that the gifts and the responsibilities and the privileges of the firstborn were handed over to the Leviim. But the story of Yaakov and Esav precedes that by many, many generations. And Esav he didn't want the responsibility. He didn't want the spiritual responsibility of doing all of this. Um, he saw it as a burden. He didn't see it as a privilege. Yaakov saw the spirituality as a gift, as a privilege. And that was the absolute difference between the two. Excuse me. Esav wanted the power, but he didn't want the power with the responsibility. Yaakov didn't want the power, but he wanted the spiritual responsibility. Um, And that's in fact why we see as well that Yaakov never really steals. When we think about this whole thing of deception, Yaakov never really steals. What he really does, according to the commentators, is that he really steps into the vacuum left by Esav's rejection of his spiritual duty. Um, and again, why it works out so beautifully is because of Esav's selling of the birthright and a refusing of it and rejection of it, he therefore cannot be the leader of the covenant. He therefore cannot be the one to get the spiritual blessings from Yitzchak. Conversely, since Yaakov accepted the Bechorah, he fought for it, he took it, he swapped that bowl of soup for the Bechorah, it follows that he must receive the blessings that enable spiritual leadership to survive in the physical world. And therefore, we see the whole drama of the blessings that unfold is not deception, but it's really the natural continuation. It's a natural consequence of the choices that the two of them made earlier. I just want to end with this very, very briefly. Um, we find something in Jewish history that even though we see that Esav, the individual, fails, we somehow see that the kochot, the spiritual energies of Esav, don't disappear. And beautifully, Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, they both describe this Esav energy as eventually returning to Am Yisrael in a positive form. And they give examples. And what I mean by the Esav energy, so it's that strength, that fighter. And where do they say? So they say in the Maccabees. The Maccabees, the Maccabim, they had Esav's physical courage in Yaakov's hands. If you look at the Bar Kokhba, right, the revolt against the Romans, there again, they somehow had strength in defense of Torah. More contemporary, this is where Rav Kook would come into it. If you look at the Zionist pioneers, the Chalutzim, Jewish farmers, builders, engineers, reclaiming physical land through sweat and grit, right? It wasn't just through Torah, it was through actual hard work. You look at Sahel, modern day army of Israel, God bless them, and the Jewish soldiers, their discipline, their courage, their strength, and their mission is sanctified through the mission of protecting Jewish life. And this is what Yitzhak envisaged. Esav's energy sanctified, not discarded. The tragedy of Toldot is that Esav refused his role, and the redemption will please God be when Jewish history reclaims it. And again, just by Reb Soloveitchik's words, Rav Kook's words, please God, we're in the midst of seeing that already, where we've got the Torah, we've got the kol Yaakov, that the voice is the voice of Yaakov, Hayadayim Yedei Esav, the hands of Esav, that we're able to harness the spiritual energy of Esav, bring it into the spiritual energy of Yaakov, and please God, we should soon see the ultimate redemption. Please God, the coming of the Mashiach. May that be speedily. I thank you all for joining. Look forward to seeing you all, please God, on Shabbos. Have a good night, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.